Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's Stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 3. The neon had gotten into her apartment again. Shit. With hands planted on her hips, ring of door lock swipe cards dangling from one crooked finger, Iris looked around in disgust at the colors brightly threading through the dark living room. The stuff was like kudzu, the creeper vines that she'd once read about, maybe in some place far from Los Angeles. Real kudzu still existed, greenly extending its leafy serpentine tendrils across the otherwise empty landscape. That crawling neon was what one got in LA, only confirmed the city as some fallen and degraded sphere of existence. Iris closed the door behind her. A vertical row of LEDs flashed from green to amber to red as the locks shot home in sequence, and fumbled for the lights. She had to dig her fingers under a parallel set of flickering glass tubes and snap them loose from the wall before she could reach the switch. The overhead glow from the expensive full-spectrum fluorescents came on dimmed and filtered violet and blue. Iris looked up and saw that the fixture in the center of the water-stained ceiling had also been engulfed by the neon tubing, like a bird's nest besieged by luminous snakes. She threw the ring of cards onto the utility table she had left folded out from the efficiency apartment's wall. The neon hadn't yet completely taken over that horizontal space. The stuff grew fast. She could see the tips of the softly glowing tendrils assembling and extending themselves farther, a darker string of liquefied silica along each tube supplying the raw materials, and a translucent surface effect sheath providing the power to light up the gas pumped inside. A probing lead tendril must have been prying away at the exterior of the apartment building, searching for some hairline chink between the gray cement blocks that it could wriggle through. One time before, when the neon had gotten in, Iris had traced the main stem, big around as her forearm by then, back to the bathroom toilet, where it had come up, urban legend-like, from the underground sewers. That had happened while she was asleep. She had woken to find herself in the middle of a bad dream of advertising, her walls pulsing in the night with pinyin ideograms and the flesh-colored outlines of stylized strip club dancers blinking red dots for nipples. None of the stuff on the apartment's living room walls looked as bad as that had been. This time, most of the neon ads appeared to be in Anglo-Cyrillic, with obscurely labeled bottles outlined in the brightest reds. She wasn't curious enough to puzzle out a translation of what was being hawked. As far as she could tell, most of the products might not even exist. The neon was programmed to generate words and brand names, and even skin emporia addresses, all from randomizing syllabic algorithms, the way LA was ceaselessly reinventing itself. The chances were good that at least some of the advertisements would turn out prophetic. I'll clean up this mess later. Iris didn't have time to screw around with it now. She'd needed safety goggles to deal with the broken glass tubing, and a mask and portable oxygen supply to keep from being suffocated by the vapors that would be released. That was way too much trouble, even when the pressure wasn't on her. The Neon hadn't swallowed up her genuine vintage, Naugahyde, lazy boy recliner. The crawling tubes preferred covering the hard surfaces in a locale before taking on anything as soft and cushy as that. As Iris lowered herself into the armchair's enveloping depth, letting it elevate her aching feet, something warm and rubbery climbed into her lap. "It's been hell around here," announced her pet Shat. Its complaint was voiced in a relentlessly perky voice. "Look at this place." "I'm not blind." Iris automatically stroked the Shat's bare head. "I can see it." "What are you going to do about it, huh?" The Shat's voice shifted into wheedling nag mode, a barely perceptible underlay of sawtooth waveforms filtering its words. "How am I supposed to sleep with everything lit up like the MacArthur Park Towers?" "Shush." Iris's fingertips had started to go tingly numb as the Shat's endorphic, fugo-derived neurotoxin started to seep beneath the skin. A metal taste, like licking the top of a flashlight battery, slid beneath her tongue. The world outside the apartment's multi-locked door already seemed less dark and foreboding. "I'll take care of it, but Mom's got work to do right now." The Shat perched on the arm of the recliner and watched as she fished out her jacket, the datapad Meyer had given her. "What's that?" "Stuff about a job." Iris placed the tiny black square into the Shat's paws and pushed it toward the Suresper machine's intake mouth. "So Mom can pay your cable bills. All those weep and fight Springer thorns cost money, honey. Go on, be a pal." "For you," said the Shat. It climbed down from the recliner and waddled to the waffy-textured globe in the middle of the living room. The Suresper's rubbery lips sucked the datad from the Shat's paws. The show began unfolding even before the Shat could scramble back up into Iris's lap. "Yee!" It looked behind itself just in time to see the three-dimensional projection of the owl. Yellow eyes glowing and talons extended, come swooping toward it. "Got him, Himmel!" Freeze image, with the Shat cowering against her stomach. Iris dropped her voice to the Suresper's instruction band. The insubstantial owl stopped in midair. Its broad, powerful wings buckled at the beginning of their upstroke. "Roll out, context 20 meters, then processor standby." "Don't let it get me." "Come on, you know it's not real." Iris peeled the Shat away from her midriff and let it climb down from her hands to the floor before she got up from the recliner. "Sit over there in the corner, okay? I've got work to do." The surround Esper had cost a lot of money, some of which she was still making monthly payments on to the police department's credit union. But compared to the cheap-ass flat-res Espers that were standard issue for the department, working with something like this was worth the debt load. Iris stood face to face with the owl. The projector's feed-in loop set a convex reflection of her image at the dark center of the creature's eyes. "Magnify," she told the Suresper. 2x. A second of pixel blur. Then the owl's image doubled in size. The shat squeaked in alarm and dived beneath a pile of dirty laundry. Iris stepped closer to the owl, being careful to duck her head beneath its outspread wings. She hated the sensation of any body part moving through apparently substantial objects. It made her feel like a ghost, as though she were the unreal one. She was looking for something in particular, a bright bit of metal. If this thing's valuable, she had figured, then somebody must own it. She found the proof of that logic in the band on the owl's leg, above one set of splayed, scimitar-curved claws. Isolate quarter-meter section, enlarge another 2x. The owl's foot doubled in size again, like a display of a device efficiently designed for the seizing of prey. Iris felt a chill around her heart. The last of the fuzzy warmth from the shat's topical exudations breaking down in her bloodstream. She leaned in toward the claws, close enough to read the incised markings on the owl's band. Memo record. The string of digits was probably no more than a private ID code, but she recited them one by one anyway. The other words at the lower edge of the metal band were the more significant ones. Property, Iris read aloud, of the Tyrell Corporation. That explained a lot, right there. Specifically about why her boss Meyer had this particular assignment to hand out. Anything to do with the company that made the replicants the Blade Runners hunted down, even if that company was now out of business, was of interest to the division. Even a bird. Iris stepped back from the image. Resize 1-1. The owl, caught in mid-flight, zipped back to the size it would have been in reality. She turned away from it and scanned the context in which the image had been captured. That the Ceresper had now laid over the confines of her own apartment. Faintly, the glowing lines of the neon creepers could still be seen, as though they were the secret words and glyphs of a dreaming world beneath the one in which she found herself. The image of the owl hadn't been caught out of doors. That figured, for such a valuable piece of property. Whoever had owned it, not only the Tyrell Corporation, but somebody inside the company, would have made sure to keep it indoors, safe not only from its own natural tendency to fly off into the open skies and freedom, but also from anyone who would have wanted to lay hands on it for sinister purposes. Bird nappers, supposed Iris, that it was an ongoing trade in exotic animals, or at least the simulations of them, in the crowded maze-like souk near the city's heart, in a toxic pit such as L.A. Sights of any living creature, other than survivor species, were so rare that a biophiliac hunger was generated thereby, which could be assuaged by expensive fakery. Replicants, but of animals rather than human beings. Rumors sometimes circulated through the souk's shabby booths and security-gridded storefronts of real animals, fabulously rare species caught in some dwindling environmental niche far from Los Angeles, passing from buyer to seller for dizzyingly astronomical prices. A real owl. It was hard to imagine that any of them still existed in the wild, let alone in the city, would be worth a fortune. Whose fortune, though? The big question, Iris figured. Who was the owl belong to now? Given that the nominal owner, the Tyrell Corporation, was defunct, who had the ownership of the owl passed to? She'd have to root around a little, find out who the survivors and heirs to the Tyrell Corporation were. Who? Iris spoke the words like the owl's own hooting cry, and smiled. The bird was a hunter like herself. She could admire the sharpness of its claws. She couldn't make out the details of the high-ceilinged room that the Ceresper had laid over her own. The light from that other space, dim and fragmentary, cast anemic, wavering shadows with too little strength to keep from being swallowed up by a larger surrounding darkness. Enhance ambient light levels, Iris instructed the Ceresper. 50 pink lumens. She always started a bright-scaled visual scan in the pink zone, the spectrum band that the human eye could perceive. Going white into the full bandwidth spectra added more information, but rarely anything useful. What the eye can see, Iris repeated a basic police training adage. The eye can find. The corollary being that what the eye couldn't see wasn't important. Another 10. Stop and edge sharp boundaries. Probable physical objects. Max detail depth. The high-ceilinged room that the Ceresper had called up now seemed flooded with daylight, as though the other building's roof had been torn off during some season when the city wasn't being pounded with monsoon rains. Banks of candles, guttering in crystal dishes, or antlered in horizontal arcs by the arms of cathedral-style candelabra, had their small teardrop flames almost eclipsed by the multipled light filling the summoned room. At the same time, the owl, arrested in its flight, yellow eyes and claw tips gleaming, seemed to shimmer for a moment as each feather leapt into unnaturally high definition. The effect was as if a rough crayon sketch had suddenly been redone with a single hairbrush, honed engraving needle and infinite patience. The outspread claws looked sharp as hypodermics. The winged creature held her attention again. Fact check basic. Taxonomic on down. A neutered, dispassionate voice sounded from the Ceresper. Bubo virginianus, commonly known as great horned owl. Adult size varies, generally within range of 63 to 66 centimeters. Wings spread 1.4 meters. Largest, best known variety of common owls. Former range in wild extending throughout all parts of North America. Urban areas? It took a second for the voice to switch to another text section of its built-in encyclopedic function. On occasion, particularly in areas adjacent to open country or with large, densely forested park zones with small prey opportunities. So, thought Iris, it could live in a city. But it had been a long time since L.A. had anything like a park in it, at least in the sense of green growing things and small edible creatures running around, other than rats. The voice picked up again. Range in coloration, nearly white in Arctic areas to dark brown and gray, mottled and streaked markings below. Yeah, I got that much. Iris regarded the owl, suspended in midair once again. Current population status? Extinct in wild. Certainty level 100%. Last captive breeding program terminated. DNA samples discarded as non-viable. Some unsupervised trading suspected among private collectors. No official priority level established for tracking. That was pretty much as Iris had suspected. Government agencies from the local level right through to the UN had enough on their hands without worrying about bubo virginianus. In this world, people were an endangered species. It might not have seemed like that when pushing your way through the packed streets of Los Angeles, but outside the remaining population magnets, LA, Mexico City, Jakarta, the Euro Disney workers, Paradise, New Beijing, the human gene pool dried up rapidly. The cities were like the last luridly fluorescent night blossoms on a dying bush, roots withering in polluted soil. If humanity didn't get transplanted successfully to the star colonies, then it would be as extinct as the owl and every other creature that didn't make the cut in a toxin-rich environment. Hard to imagine what collectors would be around to trade the last few members of the otherwise dead breed. Iris knew all that and didn't care. She had the same comforting belief system as the generations before her. She had the same comforting belief system as the generations before her. I'll be gone before the shit comes down. Gone in the sense of no longer being alive, no matter how good she was at the Blade Runner trade. And deep in her heart, she knew she was the best that her boss Meyer had at the moment. She knew it was a short-lived profession. She wasn't worried about the Wombog curve, the burnout cycle that tripped up most runners. Only wimps and whiners let themselves get tweaked about killing replicants. But eventually, as in any contact sport, even a long-term champ would feel her steps slowing by a fraction of a second, the gun in her hand weighing a fraction of an ounce more, coming up and aiming a hair's breadth too late and a silver of a degree wide off the fatal mark on the chest of its target, all of which would give that faster, harder, and younger target the microsecond gap in time for turning, aiming, and firing before she could get her own shot off. That was the unfair thing about replicants, and why hunting them was eventually like betting against the house. They were always de facto at their prime. Their 4-year lifespan, as much as some of them griped about it, meant they were always at the top of their own efficiency curve, at their fastest and smartest and deadliest peak. At least, thought Iris, they don't have to worry about losing a step as they get older. And many of the replicants, especially the ones designed for military combat, had a lot on the ball to begin with. They were to humans as the owl was to the small, furry creatures that it seized in its scything talons and tore apart with the cruel machinery of its hooked beak. It was no wonder that the authorities tolerated having Blade Runners. The next step up in the prey and predator chain, running around the streets and firing off cannon-sized weaponry in the midst of the taxpayers and citizens. The alternative was even bleaker. Fat chance of getting the human race to pack up and move out to the stars, with the negative advertisement of escaped replicants who were supposed to be mankind's slaves and servants in the far colonies, proving how much tougher and more dangerous than their masters they were. In that regard, there was a real PR value in Blade Runners blowing away the escapees in as public a manner as possible. It showed that everything was still under control, that the gone bad replicants would be eliminated before they could crush too many people's heads like eggshells. As long, mused Iris bitterly, as they let us do our jobs, which, as her boss Meyer had indicated to her, was a matter up in the air for the moment. That was just more shit destined to come down someday, like the oil-dark rains burdening the black clouds above the city. With any luck, Iris figured, she'd have made her wad by then, rolling up the bounties and socking them away in her retirement accounts, and she'd be able to chill out in her comfy apartment, reminiscing about how good a bullet-warmed gun had felt in her hand. Back when she'd been in the game, and watching on the broadcast news as the city's streets filled with blood. So much for the bird, Iris spoke aloud. From the corner of her eye, she spotted her pet, Chat, creeping out a few inches from its hiding place and regarding the frame-stalled image with acute suspicion and loathing. Iris turned her attention back to the surroundings that the Ceresper had summoned up. A ghost-walled room, now more brightly lit than her own. Expensive, as she had figured it would be, wood paneling from some close-grained tree species that was probably reduced to a few acres in New Guinea by now. If in fact the last of the breed hadn't been leveled to provide the board footage for the illusory chamber in which Iris stood. Common knowledge that a lot of high-level corporate execs with money to burn indulged in the luxury of species extinction, giving their material comforts a true après-moi, le dourge thrill. It wasn't a complete wipeout unless any surviving genetic material was taken from deep cryo-storage and destroyed, to make sure nobody came along later and recreated one's unique and private possessions. That was probably what had happened to Bubo virginianus's DNA samples as well. Nothing enhanced the collector's market like scarcity, and nothing enhanced scarcity like death. For animal collectors, extinction, or as close to it as one could get while still leaving a specimen or two alive, was a desirable quality. And for the rich, the dead past was a treasure trove as well. The illusory space that the Ceresper had conjured up was tastefully, not her taste, but someone's, and expensively appointed with true museum-level antiques, bits and pieces from the dead centuries before this dying one. Even with only an optical feed to her senses, Iris could just about smell the hand-rubbed matte patina on the ornately inlaid writing desk standing against one wall on curved legs with gilt-clawed feet. Above it, a circular convex mirror surrounded by stylized golden sun rays showed her own face's image. The Ceresper's simulator programming had spliced that bit of the real-world data into the illusory one. There was another image in the mirror, of someone approaching from a dark hallway on the opposite side of the high-ceilinged room. The hallway's shadows, even with the light enhancement she had ordered from the Ceresper, all but concealed the figure of a short and slight man frozen in mid-step as he headed toward her. The only detail that the light was able to pick out was its own reflected gleam upon a deep silver bowl he carried in one hand. "Resume action. Half speed." Iris stepped back from the room's center so the man's reconstructed image wouldn't overlap with her own physical presence. "Maintain enhanced light levels." Even before she had finished giving the Ceresper its instructions, the owl's wings swept into motion. Iris ducked reflexively as two slow-motion beats, like the furling and unfurling of a magician's feathered cape, brought the creature over her head and onto a metal perch, away from the small flames of the candelabra. The owl's claws seized onto the perch's crossbar, its feathers smoothed into place as it drew the broad wings close to itself. Golden eyes, perfectly round as coins, turned their fierce, unblinking gaze toward the approaching image. The man's image, carrying the silver bowl, stepped slowly into the illusory room where Iris could see him. Her first thought was that he looked like death. Her second was that death would look better. "Freeze image." The image halted, unmoving as the owl in mid-flight had been. Iris stepped up closer to the image, examining the man's face, almost nose to nose. Between the man and the owl were certain similarities. The man's eyes were magnified by black-rimmed, rectangular lensed glasses, giving him an owlish look, avidly staring, as though some small prey had been spotted in the patterned oriental rug that the Ceresper had laid out underfoot. Skin of wrinkled parchment was stretched tight across the facial bones. The city's rains might never have come in this man's lifetime, leaving him to wither in the deracinating sun beyond the clouds. One corner of the man's mouth had already lifted into a smile as he had entered the room, the kind of smile it struck Iris that a person got when they were about to indulge in some small private pleasure. Pleasant for him, thought Iris, maybe not so much for anything else. She stepped back from the man's image and instructed the Ceresper again. "ID, male subject." The Ceresper was silent for a few seconds longer than usual. "Process failure," the machine announced. "No identity file on record for subject in view. Redact command." "Really?" Iris glanced away from the image and over her shoulder toward the Ceresper. "All banks trolled?" "Trolled. Indices and by file mode. Still negative." The Shat had overcome some of its fear of the owl and had crept out close to Iris's ankle. "What's that mean?" "Means this guy's one rich son of a bitch. Or maybe was," Iris corrected herself. There was always the chance that he was dead already. Either way, it took a lot of money and the power that went with it to keep one's personal information out of the LAPD databanks. Tyrell Corporation power. Iris slowly nodded. The odds were in favor of it. "Facial scan," said Iris. "Block and grid. Left profile, left 3/4, full face, right 3/4, right profile. Index all possible recognition points for brute force troll." "Excuse me," the Ceresper interrupted Iris's orders, "but brute force ID trawling was made illegal by United Nations Justice Court Administrative Decree Code MMH, executive number 13-4583, reaffirmed on appeal number 565-8891. Adopted as procedure standard by Los Angeles Police Department, command level Alpha Alpha 0.12. Wow, strings of numbers always impressed the Shat. What's that mean? Figure it out, Iris answered irritably. She spoke louder so the Ceresper would be sure to hear. Override on personal authority. Execute command as given. Must advise, all override instructions are reported to departmental supervisor. As if I didn't know that, Iris felt a thin smile show on her face. The Ceresper would think on her, she knew already. It was wired straight to LAPD switchboard, which meant that a piece of paper with her name on it somewhere would land on her boss Meyer's desk. He could either round file it or keep it handy for some blackmail possibilities against her. She didn't care which. Nobody worked in the Blade Runner division for very long without racking up a fat file folder of black marks. Proceed, instructed Iris. A job like that would take some time, not in the scanning of the image's face, but in cranking through the match-up with the details of any person, human or replicant, outside the regulation ID bank. With the Shat tagging behind her, Iris headed for the apartment's kitchen module to scrounge a cup of something warm. The illusory room's wood paneling had been laid over the door. She walked through the optical data of the burnished wood grain, not even blinking as the sensory feed passed across her face. The Shat had to pluck up its courage and dive through, eyes closed. Tucked into a ball, it rolled against the kitchen module's wall, then scrambled onto the solitary chair at the fold-down table. She'd remembered to bring her ring of swipe cards with her. She needed them to get into the freezer compartment of the wall fridge. This is going to be a tough one. That conviction had come over her, even before the Ceresper had come up blank on the regulation ID process. Better fortify myself. When the LEDs of the freezer locks had blinked to green, Iris opened it and took out the unmarked cylinder of black market coffee. It wasn't the caffeine levels, way above what the UN's health police allowed, that she wanted so much as the reaffirmed knowledge that she had pulled off tough jobs in the past and had raked in enough bounties that she could afford a pricey, sold by the gram luxury like this. Can I have some? The Shat perched on the back of the chair, its eyes widened into a hopeful expression. Please? Sure. A thimbleful was all it took to hop the little construct up more than it already was. Any more than that would blow out the tiny Teflon-valved heart in its chest. You watch it for me, okay? At the sink end of the kitchen module's countertop, Iris carefully deferred and sterilized the interior of her favorite yellow mug, an only slightly chipped antique that read Beans and Machines, Seattle, around the side. It had been a while since she had spent any major relaxing time in the apartment. The last two jobs, the Enesque rep and the one before him, had been practically back to back, with no break between. That was her preferred mode of operating, to stay on the hunt as long as possible, pushing the fatigue barrier away with pure strength of will. But it did tend to shoot the crap out of her housekeeping. Entropy moved into the place during her extended absences and silted the corners with gray, ageless dust. As her hands busied themselves in the sink, Iris looked into the tiny mirror, spattered with minute dots of toothpaste and hazed with steam that she'd hung there when she'd first moved in. She wiped it dear with her sleeve and leaned closer to her image, studying it as she had the one in the illusory room summoned by the Ceresper. "Looking good," Iris whispered to herself. The city hadn't crept under her skin yet, loosening the thread-like sinews that connected her flesh to the bones beneath. Still young and hard, she smiled and nodded. Most people in LA looked as if they had been chewed on by invisible teeth, then spat out, more or less in one piece. Even street punks and trench cases, whole tribes younger than her, and the glossy retro strippers down in the clubs. Under the subdermal thin film silicone frosting of both the real females and the artful transies, the rot had nearly always set in. You could see it in their eyes. The town-aged people, as though there were an epidemic of Methuselah syndrome rolling down the streets. It was a wonder that anyone, human or otherwise, had more than a 4-year lifespan. "Maybe I'll get out," thought Iris, "before I'm that way too." She carried the coffee back into the apartment's front room and into the illusory chamber that filled it for the time being. "Results? Process terminated," replied the Ceresper's overly calm voice. "When exact match found, male subject in view is identified as one Dr. Eldon Tyrell." Iris managed to find the arm of the recliner and sat down on it. "Details." As she sipped at the cup, the chat wandered from the kitchen module, paws wiping its ration of coffee from the round cheeks of its face. "Former CEO of Tyrell Corporation, now deceased." She wasn't surprised. "Mode of death, homicide." The word as unaffected by emotion as any other in the Ceresper's vocabulary. "Perp conclusively identified as one Roy Batty, escaped replicant. Perp retired." Cop talk. Humans were murdered, but replicants were retired. Both were equally dead afterwards. Iris wondered which Blade Runner had gotten the bounty for this batty job. Must have been a tough one, she figured. If the replicant had managed to penetrate the security systems of a major outfit like the Tyrell Corporation, he would have had to have been smarter and more dangerous than the average escapee. Whoever took him down, thought Iris, should have gotten a bonus. When she got some free time, hardly likely, she'd have to root around in the department records and find out which one of her colleagues it had been. So the owl had very likely belonged to Dr. Tyrell, a personal pet, funded as a corporate write-off. Like the high-ceilinged room's other expensive furnishings, no doubt. Typical exec perk. But if the good doctor was dead, then it wasn't him wanting the owl back. Somebody else at the Tyrell Corporation. Maybe. They could probably sell off the bird and make enough to meet the company's payroll for a couple of weeks. But it was her understanding that the Tyrell Corporation was as dead as the doctor who had run it, so there wouldn't be anybody left at the company who'd want to get such a valuable asset back into its possession, which meant that some third party knew about the creature, knew what it was worth, and naturally wanted to grab it. But if they were using official police channels to track the owl down instead of going through some private operation, they must have some powerful political connections. Not, figured Iris, the kind of people you want to screw around with. The job was getting uglier and more interesting at the same time, which must have been why her boss Meyer had given it to her, rather than some lesser skilled Blade Runner. The feeling grew larger inside her gut that the missing owl had more importance than just its money value to black market real animal dealers and collectors, which also meant that the process of tracking it down might have some deeper and darker risks attached to it. If somebody as protected as the owl's original owner, the late Dr. Eldon Tyrell, could get himself iced, then the chances were good that the creature was flying around out there in the night over some dangerous territory. Cool, thought Iris, nodding to herself. Maybe Meyer really was her pal after all. This wasn't some hoke job that he'd shuffled off onto her. It was starting to smell like something much bigger, which meant that there'd be all the more bonus points for her. Maybe not in the form of hard cash money, but in recognition from both the higher-ups in the department and from the invisible, string-pulling forces that they served. If she pulled it off. Don't worry. She turned her thin smile toward the frozen image of the owl sitting on its perch. Circular yellow gaze as avid as before. I'll find you, all right. You can count on it. The chat echoed her self-confidence pump, bobbing itself up and down in a corner of the room. Yeah, you can do it. No, you can. Iris ignored the chat. Resume action. She instructed the Ceresper. Normal speed. Dr. Eldon Tyrell's resurrected image with its unpleasant partial smile passed by Iris. She watched as the image carried the silver bowl in its hands over to the antique writing desk and set it down. The image looked over its shoulder, still smiling, toward the owl on its perch. For a moment, a tiny spark of something close to recognition passed between the two images, as though each saw in the other's magnified eyes its own reflection. The man's image spoke aloud. Hungry? The recorded voice struck Iris as being mockingly cruel as the smile on Tyrell's face. Iris had a good idea of what was going to happen next. Feeding time. She wasn't disappointed. An artificial owl could be kept going on all sorts of things, including a fresh set of batteries inserted under some feathered hatch between its wings. But a living one had a predator's appetite for other, smaller living things. She didn't need the Ceresper's encyclopedic function to tell her that. It was the way of the world. This one or any other. She saw the image of the owl rising higher on its perch, spreading its broad wings partway open, then settling them tape-like around itself again. The aroused hunger was apparent. That's an expensive meal, thought Iris. She watched as Tyrell's image lifted a white rat by its pink, hairless tail from the silver bowl. The gray and brown vermin that scuttled through the strata of LA's rubbish-filled alleys weren't worth much. But one like that, a real one, could command a good price among the dealers at the souk. The white rat was bent into a soft C shape by its pink feet having been bound together by a tight circle of what looked to be nylon thread. A high-pitched, terrified and terrifying squeal sounded in both the illusory room and Iris's surrounding apartment as the dangling creature wriggled and jerked like a hectic, spring-driven toy. "Is this what you want? Tyrell lifted the struggling white rat higher. The owl on the other side of the paneled room responded by leaning hungrily forward on its perch, a stroke of its out-furled wings maintaining its balance. "I don't need to see this," thought Iris. With a snip of a tiny pair of scissors from the writing desk's top drawer, the image of Dr. Tyrell cut the circlet of thread around the white rat's feet. Its frantic gyrations turned wilder, almost pulling the hairless tail from Tyrell's grasp. With a flick of his hand, Tyrell tossed the white rat into the center of the room. The rat's image landed a few inches away from the tips of Iris's boots and froze in place. Its bright red, bead-like eyes fastened on what it had spotted across the illusory space. "Run!" Iris spoke aloud, though she knew it would be no good. "Under the desk!" What she was watching happen had already happened. It won't catch you there. And what had happened couldn't be changed. She turned her own gaze, hearing the audible displacement of air as the owl's image spread its great wings and leapt from its perch. The owl appeared to fill the center of the room, with no magnification necessary from the Ceresper that had summoned it into being. Its claws spread apart into the perfect machinery of capture and death. Beneath the owl's swift shadow, the white rat crouched down, too far into the paralysis of fear to do otherwise. "Okay, stop." Iris closed her eyes. "I mean freeze. Freeze action." She didn't open them as she gave more instructions to the Ceresper. "Search for other discrete sequences. Time separate from current display." The apartment was silent for a moment as the Ceresper probed the rest of the data she had fed into its soft mouth. "Found," it announced at last. "One sequence. Commence playback?" "Sure." Whatever it was, it couldn't be worse than the coldly smiling Dr. Eldon Tyrell. "Commence." Another illusory room snapped into perceived existence. Laid over the more solid walls of Iris's apartment, it looked just as luxurious, dipped in the Tyrell Corporation's endless well of money. The image of a man stood waiting in the center of the room, younger than Tyrell, as just about anybody living would be. A long, shabby-looking coat that he'd probably slept in on more than one occasion. Dark hair, cropped close, almost to a buzz cut. Utilitarian and unfussed with. Not bad looking, Iris judged, with a small, faded scar on one side of his chin, and intense, angry eyes. His disgruntled, world-sick expression made him appear harder and more mean-spirited than he really was. Iris smiled to herself, spotting the thinness of the man's tough guy facade. Scratch a cynic, she thought, and wound a romantic. She didn't bleed that particular way herself. She could see where it would have been a problem for this guy, whoever he was or had been. The image standing in the center of the newly summoned illusory room was obviously a cop, even without spotting the bulge of his high-calibered gun under his coat. Iris had been sure of that much. And a cop with soft notions about the world, about what could and couldn't be experienced in it, was already bound hand and foot to the breaking arc of the Wombog curve. This one was already burnt out, even with only the optical sensory data and no actual physical presence to work from. Iris could just about smell it on him. Must have reached his limit. Iris peered closer at the man's image, as though she were a coroner examining a specimen stood upright on a vertical slab. But kept going anyway. She frowned. It usually took a lot of pressure to get some curve casualty like this out on the job again. Somebody in the department put the screws to him. Who? Freeze image, Iris instructed the Ceresper. ID male subject in immediate view. The answer was in the open access files, coming back at her within milliseconds. Last name of male subject, the Ceresper spoke flatly, is Deckard. First name, Rick. LAPD? Affirmative. Male subject, Deckard Rick. Last known employment with Los Angeles Police Department. Last known. Something had happened to the poor bastard. Things usually did when a burnt-out case didn't care what happened to him. What division? Male subject, Deckard Rick. Attached to replicant escapee detection and interception. Iris hadn't been expecting that. This guy's a Blade Runner? Slang designate recognized for indicated departmental division. The Ceresper's vocabulary, parsing functions stepped through the rest of their logic. Thus, affirmative. Thought I knew them all. Iris put the tip of her forefinger to her lips, mulling over this revelation. She was familiar with all the currently active Blade Runners, inasmuch as they represented the competition she needed to stay on top of. And the inactives, the dead or no longer functional, either burnouts or those who had managed to get themselves safely promoted or transferred out of danger, usually in the form of sticking the barrels of their own guns into their mouths, were in her mental database as well. Or so she had thought. But this Deckard person was an unknown, a blank in that record. Which meant that she had either overlooked him somehow. She immediately dismissed that possibility. Or something else had happened to him. A data erasure of some kind. And it had happened at the division level. Figured Iris, instead of farther up. If the deliberate hole in the data had been created by departmental action, by the real and spooky powers above her boss Meyer, then they would have taken out this Deckard's regulation profile as well, instead of leaving his name and divisional affiliation behind to ID him with. Interesting, mused Iris aloud. Very. What is? The Shat, now stationed by her ankles, looked up at her. The only thing more curious than a hole where something should be is a partial hole, you know? She smiled down at the Shat. If somebody's got the power to remove it, they should have the power to remove it all the way, without leaving little pieces behind. And if they want to remove it in the first place, why wouldn't they want to remove it at all? Dunno. The Shat shook its head. Cuddle? Later. I'm still working. The tingling, subdermal numbness in her fingertips had already ebbed away, along with whatever woozy endorphins had been produced by handling the Shat. That was fine by Iris, figuring out a new assignment's intricacies, sniffing the trail of the tiny and fragmentary data and where they led to, gave a better high. This Deckard thing. She had the sense, down in the base of her gut, that it was important, though what a partially deleted Blade Runner could have to do with tracking down an escaped pet owl, she didn't have a clue on yet. Resume playback. The owl showed up again in the Ceresper's current discrete sequence, only for a moment, sitting on a different metal perch, but with the same alert and round golden eyes scanning the territory in front of it, which this time included the image of a woman coming into the illusory room. She looked even colder and harder than the Blade Runner Deckard, though she was obviously younger and, by objective standards, prettier. The woman looked as if she had been dipped in money as well, gilded by its transforming power into another piece of the Tyrell Corporation's expensive furnishings. Her dark hair was done up in some kind of retro fashion, like the brittly, unpleasant rich girl in an ancient black and white movie. The image's makeup had the overpriced, controlled sexuality that Iris associated with virgins and mental patients. Iris shook her head and looked away, giving in to her own deep instinctive dislike of the young woman, without bothering to figure out what about her had triggered such a quick, aversive reaction. Maybe she reminded me of somebody. In the illusory room, in the Ceresper's brief snippet of reconstructed past, the two images exchanged a few words, and then it was over. "Sequence, terminus," announced the machine. "That's it?" "Affirmative." The circuitry inside the Ceresper didn't care, one way or the other. Loaded data contains 2 cron sequences, optical and auditory representation. Viewing of first sequence aborted before terminus. Upon command, second sequence played through. Not much to go on, grumped Iris to herself. There had been only a quick glimpse of the owl, looking exactly as it had in the other sequence, and a few words exchanged between the images of the woman and the cop named Deckard. She had barely paid attention to what the two had said. She'd been paying attention to the owl over at the side of the reconstructed space. The bit had been so brief and uninformative that Iris had to wonder why Meyer had included it in the first place. "Play it again," suggested the Shat, sensitive to her mood. This time, she listened to what the 2 images said. "Do you like our owl?" That was the first thing the woman said to Deckard as she'd walked into the room and caught him looking at it. The woman's use of the word hour confirmed what Iris had already surmised. The owl belonged to the Tyrell Corporation itself. "It's artificial?" Deckard had asked an obvious and logical question in return. Owls of any kind weren't seen every day. "Of course. Freeze sequence," Iris instructed the Ceresper. Now that she'd heard it correctly, it didn't make any sense. "Back 5 seconds. Resume sequence action." The woman's image said it again, in her cold, unemotional tone. "Of course." Meaning that the owl was artificial, as Deckard had asked, or that the woman had believed at that time that it was. Iris listened to the rest of the image's dialogue. "Must be expensive," Deckard again. "Very," said the woman's image. Iris halted the Ceresper's playback once more. The words, these in addition to the others, made even less sense than they had before. She stepped closer to the woman's frozen image, studying it, trying to figure out if that one word had been either a deliberate lie or a simple mistake. An artificial owl of this quality would have been expensive, all right, but not enough to brag about. Larger and more complicated avian simulacra, emus, and ostriches, emus, and ostriches, and the like, even down to nanotech stuffed hummingbirds, could be obtained easily enough at the souk in the center of LA. A noodle stand could afford a mascot like that. Iris herself patronized one down the street that had a brace of artificial freshwater arowanas swimming in a tank behind the cash register. Those fish had never been anywhere near the Amazon where their biological prototypes had been sourced, whereas a genuine living owl sitting on a perch at company headquarters would have really been something for a Tyrell Corporation representative to brag so haughtily about. That kind of expenditure, on top of the already lavishly appointed surroundings, would have indicated a whole other level of wealth and power. Thinking? The Shat tapped at her shin with one of its tiny paws. She nodded. "'Tis a mystery." Her words were followed by a shrug. "But that's the kind of thing I get paid to figure out." There was one more scrap of information to be gotten out of the second discrete sequence on the Ceresper. At the very end of the bit, the image of the woman spoke her name. Iris played it back to make sure she got it right. "I'm Rachel." That was what the woman had told the cop named Deckard. Iris mentally filed the info away and forgot about it for the time being. She had more important things to worry about right now, such as where this missing owl had gotten to. This woman in the data she'd fed to the Ceresper. Rachel, whoever, had probably been caught up in the collapse of the Tyrell Corporation, along with everybody else who had been connected to the Replicant manufacturing company. Not a big deal. At least that part wasn't. Go back to the first discrete sequence. The room with the cop named Deckard and the snotty young woman disappeared, replaced by the other illusory one that held the owl in the late Dr. Eldon Tyrell, with his silver bowl and the antique writing desk, and the white rat he had tossed onto the center of the room's intricately loomed oriental rug. This time, Iris watched the sequence all the way through. The owl did what its own biological nature had programmed it to do. The claws that catch. Iris found herself thinking, remembering some scrap of a nonsense poem. It wasn't nonsense to the white rat, whose programming was to die. The image of the owl flapped to its perch, where it bloodily disassembled its meal. Still coldly smiling, the image of Dr. Tyrell watched, then picked up the empty silver bowl and carried it away, back into the darkness from which it had emerged. "Sequence complete," announced the Ceresper. "Whatever," thought Iris. "Terminate session." The illusory room, with its candle-lit, cavernous spaces and glossy, expensive wood paneling, disappeared, restoring Iris's own smaller apartment. The neon had died. It happened sometimes. Iris found herself in darkness, relieved only by the horizontal slots of bluish street light coming in through the apartment's small shuttered and barred windows. The Shat was freaked by the sudden gloom and clung to her ankle, shivering. The neon's power source, usually a parasitic tap on a main feeder circuit, had probably gotten overextended and had snapped at some critical corner junction. That left only the pencil-thin glass tubes covering the walls and nearly every other hard surface to be broken up and swept away. Ghost-like vacated letters and pictographs. "I'll just clear off the bed," thought Iris. If she woke up surrounded by shards and needles of broken glass, it wouldn't be the first time. "Residual data left," announced the Ceresper, "from encyclopedic function." At the bedroom door, still hobbled by the frightened Shat, Iris glanced back at the machine. "All right," she said. "Give it to me." Large, varies in color, nearly white when found in Arctic conditions. Mottled, dark gray, and brown otherwise. "I already heard that bit." Iris shook her head. "So it's a bird," she said, disgustedly. "That's all it is." There was more. Once thought to possess supernatural powers due to ability to see in the dark, solemn, prepossessing aspect gave rise to being considered as symbols of wisdom or occult knowledge. End of data. Even better, said Iris sourly. But the Ceresper had switched itself off and wasn't listening.